All but
in
10
20
seconds?
seconds. Yeah. You find it very hard to gank someone as opposed to having a long time to find someone. That's kind of where I think it could really reduce the chances of, oh, this is just an ongoing thing for the enemy team.
Fair enough.
All right. Well, I mean, I've got enough here to go on. What I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce the vision of the ultimate for sure. But I also want to see what these upcoming nerfs do to the hero. I'm not going to do anything like I'm not going to mess with the purge ability with it yet. I'm not going to mess with the deceleration. I'm just going to wait out these current changes, see what happens, and then next step, I'm definitely going to reduce the vision of the ultimate, and then see if I need to add in back power somewhere else because of it.
So what is it, like 4K to like 2K?
I don't think there's ever really been a problem with Prophet, like the way he is. Like he's not. There's no way he's broken because all you have to do is just dust and then stand scepter him. It's like if people can't do that, it's their fault.
But Dust is only 1K, dude.
You shouldn't have to nerf him because people refuse to counter him. I feel like that's not the way to play.
It doesn't matter if Dust is a 1K radius. The argument that people are talking about,
No, but the
him being too
ganking
strong
level
from the
7
trees is whenever he's actually kiting you along the tree line, casting spells.
Yeah, but
And
600
one
range
of his
spell.
abilities has a higher range than 1K.
Yeah.
And the
But
current
also
answer
600.
to him is you purge him, right? You get rid of him, and then that gets rid of the frustration factor. But that's not fun for the Prophet player in any way, shape, or form. And the counter ability is maybe too black and white. It's too 100% countered or not. So we could probably take away the purge and reduce the vision radius and allow Prophet to have to be a little more in a little more danger.
This idea of I mean, people have been talking about it. You could, if you do take away the purge, because I think you're kind of right. A dust sand scepter is a little bit of a strong counter, a little bit black and white, like you say. So, taking away the purge ability, but then reducing the duration upon taking damage would probably be the correct thing.
I think it was Peeves who suggested that. I think that's perfectly reasonable. Plank says the same mechanic, and it makes perfect sense given the fact that if you're in combat with Raven form already, if you decide to enter combat, it reduces the cooldown to 12 seconds. It should do the same if you are forced into combat by an ally jumping you. That also butchers some of his survivability, whereas if he gets jumped and he's not killed, he just flies away and there's nothing you can do about it.
All right, cool. All right, I got enough about Prophet. Let's move on to another guy.
What are we talking about?
Anything and everything that is highly frustrating to deal with. Not so much, it doesn't have to be about power levels so much as it has to be with things that just cause a lot of toxicity or just in general hard to play against.
In the same spirit as...
I have a question.
Okay, I'll let him ask his question.
Oh, how come Kronos can buy a basher on top of his current bash when it specifically says you can't stack it?
What do you mean?
Oh, yeah,
I'm saying that basher stacks with Kronos' current bash, his passive bash.
So the bash is proccing while the proc of the other proc is going on?
No, they're not. They're both separate bashes currently.
So the cooldowns aren't tied together.
Yeah, I think it may have been a mismerge or a bug.
It's been like that for a while, but I don't think anyone's ever really done that because it's not worth it.
Kind of just like a double
It's not common knowledge. Oh, I see. So yeah, you don't need to touch it. My bad.
One thing that's definitely frustrating is on the Hellborn side, there is a medium camp that has the most wonky vision line I've ever seen in my life. Like, you walk over there and you have to walk in like 300 range of it to stack it.
Are you talking about the one next to
the one by the rune on the Hellborn?
Yeah, that one is.
That's so weird because it's like you can't see it until you're like right in front of it. It's really awkward.
Which one is that exactly?
It's the Hellborn medium above the rune on the left side.
Yeah, right next to the rune spawn in North River. Especially if the creep camp that spawns is wild hunters. They're like, it's because they're like both next to the trees.
Which one's a wild hunter?
The ones that go invis.
Oh, right. Yeah.
But yeah, you can't see that.
The blue ones,
you walk right up to it. It's so awkward.
Okay.
Yeah, there's something weird going on with that. But
yeah, no, I'll look at that.
My comment was going to be, in this, it's actually kind of in the same spirit, almost as like Prophet ulti. Geomancer, I find this hero to be incredibly frustrating to play against. Geostock to me just seems like one of
It's
the
like a wall
most
hack, dude.
It's like one of the most powerful abilities in the game.
It is.
And it's just it's just an incredible nuisance to play against. The radius that it gives for detection is
Like
1800.
3+K. Oh,
No, it's not 3K. It's like 1800.
Yeah.
But it's still far too long. I mean, it overshadows PK range by a lot. And I'm not 100% sure. Maybe somebody can confirm. Does this ability reveal through Veiled Rot?
It reveals anything that it
Reveals
doesn't. It doesn't even reveal. What it does is it puts a
Well,
dot under
I know
anybody
how
who's
it
moving.
works. I
It
know
shows
it's
Veiled Rot, it
like a
shows Veiled Rot.
sonar, but like yeah, if you are Veiled Rotted, is this ability going to show you as a red blip?
Yes, I believe.
So
Yes,
that-
yes, it does.
it's
It does.
it's broken.
that's amazing.
Geo, it's
I feel like
actually
that's kind of his
specifically-
point, though. Like that's his whole shtick is
Well, so
weak
I'm
hero,
a Tundra
powerful
fan.
E.
We just reduced Tundra's ability to counter Veiled Rot, which I'm fine with. I think anything that's like effectively countering smoke in that way is too strong. Because smoke has been inserted into the game specifically to help you get, I mean, two things, right? To continue your dominance of the game or to actually allow you to swing it back in your favor whenever the enemy has map control. And so taking the Rot revelation away from the Tundra Bird was appropriate. But if Geomancer's still doing the same thing, seems a little bit too strong to me.
Do have one question regarding the Chronos
Oh,
discussion we had
fuck
a little
my
bit
ear.
earlier.
Fuck.
I
Okay.
was like getting my microphone ready. But why is Chronos the only hero with the only bash ability in
Yeah,
the
just turn this guy
in the
down
game?
a little.
Why does Chronos have the only bash ability in the game that does not have an internal cooldown?
So the idea for Kronos to get a bunch of stackable bash that's not something that we were trying to go for. If you can read element users post on how Kronos E plus Brutalizer works, it went into version 4.2.5. So it made it to where we could semi-stackable, but that it wasn't. We're trying to make it to where an item wasn't completely useless on another hero. Like if you guys remember back in the day when Dota, it was like there was just certain items that just you could not physically use on certain heroes. And we have that in certain situations and certain heroes as well. And we're trying to make it to where every item has some sort of value that it can bring. So we didn't want to make it completely double bashing procs to happen, but we wanted to bring something back semi stackable. Now, a good solution could be to add an internal cooldown to Kronos to disallow this even further if we find that it's too much. And right now we are seeing Kronos win and get banned a ton. So we are looking at different ways of lowering frustration factors, and obviously being chain bash is one of them. So putting an internal cooldown on Kronos isn't that bad of an idea.
Yeah, I think the main reason
Yes,
why
thank
we
you. Thank you.
I think the main reason why we actually removed that is because we wanted Kronos to proc the damage while his Chronosphere is on the target, and if it had a cooldown, it means you'll proc it less during that time. So that was the intention.
So-
Just
Yeah, it
increase
would.
DPS, but this
Just
is like
have
a
a 2
side effect.
seconds cooldown on the
Oh,
stun
turn him
then.
down a little again.
Well, then couldn't you make it so that the Curse of Ages would react differently whilst within a Chronosphere? Just make a special interaction for that.
Yeah, we could totally do that. So yeah, that's a suggestion. That's a good suggestion.
Yeah.
So yeah, we can do that. It's not a problem. Thank you.
One more thing I want to quickly talk about. Why does Savage Maze not work on Zephyr? That's intentional, right?
Okay, I'll answer
actually
this.
seen element user answer this one on the forum before.
Yeah, I'll answer this. So for a long time we couldn't find a bug just because of code, and now that we finally got the resources to fix that bug, it's actually being fixed in the upcoming patch.
Good.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Because I heard from other Firstborn employees before that this was, I don't know how it was on purpose, but maybe it was a small bit of miscommunication. Then.
No, it wasn't definitely no, it's not on purpose. It's just a side effect of a change that wasn't caught until later. And unfortunately, we just couldn't have the resource to fix it, so it just had to stay there until we had the resource to fix it, and it's finally fixed.
Imagine a world where with 60% evasion and no Savage Mace. You don't have to imagine it exists.
Well, like the problem with like heroes like Zephyr,
Why
I
is
think,
Thunder
like
Ring
from a balanced design or from a, like general design, is that Zephyr is, or at least used to be before his ultimate was changed.
as well? Oh my god.
It was completely
I didn't
useless
see.
against ranged heroes, and was
Why do I get grief?
or like completely bullshit against ranged heroes, and completely bullshit and useless against melee heroes. So it does not feel like something that would be fun to play around, because it's either extremely OP or it's either extremely useless. There's no middle ground,
Yeah.
So why do you think it's right to?
I just have a general comment. If you're in this call, please turn on push to talk.
All right, so let's go back to it now. We're talking about Zephyr right now. All right, run that back for me.
It's like a design choice. I've seen this on Zephyr. I've seen this also a little bit on Tremble. It's where you overbuff one ability, one niche of the hero so far. In this case, it's like basically ranged heroes doing almost no damage or 60% less damage, and melee heroes doing full damage. Against the hero, it seems like very unfair and very like not fun to play around it, because there's just nothing you can basically do around it. If you pick that hero, you automatically win against a range hero.
Right.
And you
so
basically
the
It's an
idea.
auto win.
Well, so the idea of Han and Dota and most MOBAs is that you want higher
Free
level play
MMR.
for players to intelligently draft around each other, right? I pick this hero, you pick that hero. The idea of Zephyr is to give him something incredibly strong against a certain type, meaning if you were to pick a bunch of ranged heroes, then I could say, well, then this is
Well, you get counter picks, right?
You
Yeah.
counterpick. And then if I pick Zephyr a little too early, then that person can retaliate. Okay, well now I'm going to go pick a melee hero to deal with you. And this puts a lot of depth and strategy into the picking
Yeah.
screen.
Yep.
So it's about rewarding players for intelligently drafting, and not so much about just everybody's picking whatever because we're too afraid to make one thing stand out against something else. So yeah, I can see that it might not be very fun for that guy, but we also have things like True Strike that can go around certain things. We do have
Another counter pick.
right. We have ways of dealing with Zephyr, even if you're a ranged hero. But at the base level, we wanted Zephyr to fit as a niche pickup against people who are running heavy ranged lineups.
Yeah, I got that, but that was what the 30% evasion that it had before this point already kind of did. Why did you choose to buff it up to 60%, which is
probably because
auto win, dude. It's insane.
When we looked at Zephyr, or whenever we look at any balance change, we see, okay, we put the balance change in, we have a goal for that balance change, and then we give it enough time to see if that balance change took effect. And then we'll look at the numbers again, and we'll say, okay, well, against ranged heroes, he's actually still underperforming. He's actually not, he's got a 47% win rate against lineups that have predominantly ranged heroes in them. So our change hasn't done exactly what it's supposed to. So then we might amp it up a little bit more. Or another thing is called perception. So in balanced design, everybody thinks that balanced design is about making things perfectly balanced, but that's not what balanced design is. Balanced design is trying to make a bunch of things work in a way that entice players to play them. So sometimes if I have a hero that is perfectly balanced but no one plays them, I haven't done my job. I can make the most balanced game in the world, but if no one plays my most balanced game in the world, then I've made the most boring, worst game in the world, right? And then if I have the most imbalanced game in the world and everyone plays it, then obviously I'm doing something right.
Yeah.
A lot of times fun trumps hardcore balance, and this is where a lot of people go, why did you do this, or why did you do that? This is just OP. Sometimes we do make things OP, and we do that very much on purpose, because right now, if no one played Zephyr for a very long time and Zephyr falls out of the meta, and then nobody thinks about Zephyr, and we look at it and we're like, okay, well, why isn't Zephyr in the meta? Okay, he doesn't fit in the meta. Well, if he does fit in the meta, we might decide to overbuff him to get a perception change. So the community go, whoa, what the shit did they do? They just made this broken. I'm going to go play this hero now. And then when they go and they play it, they realize, hey, you know what? I totally forgot that Zephyr was a good time. Then once we see that perception shift has changed the play rate of the hero, and players remember Zephyr and what Zephyr stood for, then we can tone it down again. Now, these are just strategies that over time you learn to try to get a pool played. In the international client, which is NAEU, you guys get very stuck onto a certain meta, and it doesn't matter if that meta is terrible for you, you'll still play it. You'll play it till you die. Like the suicide meta. We've done a lot of things numerically to make suicide meta just not a good idea, as opposed to dual laning in the off lane. And we've done a lot of just plain in-your-face rules that say go dual
That's
lane.
kind of try hard though.
And you'll still suicide. Whereas in
Sorry.
well, what's funny about that? I mean, it is
Chill out, man.
childish.
Chill out.
It is childish to giggle. But what was funny about what I said?
No, it was something.
No,
that
I
mentioned-
think it was the other guy, not you.
Just chill out, man. Let him talk.
Yeah, calm down.
All right, so when you're trying to work with 138 heroes, another thing that people have to realize is that this is also a business, and that in order for you to enjoy the game, we have to pay for the servers. So if heroes aren't being played, they aren't making any money either. And if they're not doing that, then slowly but surely we have scenarios where Devourer has 16 skins for him. And heroes like Kraken have still like just 3 or 4, and they're all from like 5+ years ago. These things kill your game, and you might think that that's not cool or whatever, but if you like to play Han, then these sort of things have to happen. So there's a lot more to it than just trying to make things numerically work.
Oh, I have a suggestion. Can Scout get his fade time back to half a second?
Why?
You just like to play scout, dude.
Yeah, I do, and it like put me in a very bad depression when it went to 1 second.
Come on, dude.
Is there something you're particularly avoiding by having a half-second fade time? Like, because the difference between half second and 1 second is it's big, but it's not that big.
It's really big, man.
That didn't make sense.
It's really big. It's a big difference. I was able to avoid stuff with the half second.
Name something.
I don't want
something you
to.
need to be worried about.
It's nothing to worry about. It's just, just do it. There was nothing wrong with Scout.
Okay, well, anyways, so next topic. Anybody else have anything else?
Yeah, I think like these minor things about like Scouts finish time is not really something this chat is really like suited for the best, I think. But about the whole thing Q said earlier about the meta changes and stuff. I get where you're coming from. I've also had this discussion earlier, I'm not sure with who anymore, but basically they talked about the mage fin meta where the game was basically in a very balanced state and it was
Where you don't
incredibly
take
boring.
your E anymore, right?
Yeah, but do you really think that's overbuffing
If someone
things?
has anything else to talk about?
Wait.
Wait, what? All right, so there's just a lot of going. So say that again. So you're saying that there was a state of the game where the game was very balanced.
Yeah. And do you really think that's overbuffing certain heroes to make them more played or to make them more interesting is the best way to go about trying to, well, either incline these meta changes or trying to get people to play different heroes? Don't you think there are other more better ways, for example, like changing heroes in certain ways that actually changes up their playstyle rather than just like generic number changes?
Okay. Great question. So, the first thing is we've always kind of subscribed to this balance change for a long time. Before 4.0, we had this line of balance, and anything that was above it, we tweaked towards it, and anything that was below it, we tweaked towards it, and try to make the game as humanly balanced as possible. Like numerically, just everything was not winning over something else all that much. And we had this state for a very, very long time, in which Han was the most balanced it ever was. Pre 4.0, statistically, the game just had very low ban rates on certain heroes. It seemed like it was very sporadic. What was being banned wasn't, which is a good thing. And we saw numerically everything seemed very, 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 very balanced. However, the game was growing stale and our player numbers were dropping because people were complaining that it's the same heroes. There wasn't a lot of reasons to change or play something different, and that's because the game was so balanced that we just had this core group that people wanted to play because they were more popular, more fun to play. So like, there's no reason to play something other than Scout if everything's so balanced that Scout is just more fun that way. Now at 138 heroes, I hate to say it, but there are heroes that are going to be less fun than other heroes just because there's only so many ways you can do a hero. There's only so many ways that you can design something before you start running into pitfalls of overlap and running out of ideas and all sorts of things come up when you're making that many heroes. So those heroes start to fall by the wayside. So we were told that switching things up and changing things up and shaking things for whatever way we could to get this kind of stagnant meta out would be the way to go. Now, you said, hey, we can change things. Why don't you change things how their play style rather than just their numbers? Well, the number one complaint that we get anytime that we do a rework is that is when we change their play styles. A lot of the players who have been playing Han for years and years and years, they grow attached to horribly designed heroes. They'll like heroes like Gravekeeper, who really just have no point in the game besides dumping nuke damage onto another hero. They don't really bring any strategy to a lineup. And we get to a point that if we change the playstyle of Gravekeeper, people will be up in arms. There will be Gravekeeper fans who will just say, I quit over this. So changing playstyles tend to lead to more problems than good. Numerical changes can change the power levels of heroes, and we try to buff heroes, but not buff them too incredibly much. And a lot of the times people will complain that something is so insanely broken, but our statistics have very rarely shown that to be true. There's a lot of emotional bias that people put into the game where they see a hero win over a certain amount of times and they think, oh, this hero's deadly. And then I go, oh, is it? Well, let me go look it up. And then I go look it up and it's not winning at all, or it's not winning in the competitive brackets in any way, shape, or form. And it's just that person's viewpoint at the time. So when we take on reworks, we want to make sure that the hero is draftable, meaning that it has a reason at the pick screen to win a strategy. We want to make sure that the hero has a unique play style that doesn't overlap with other heroes, and that the hero isn't too frustrating to play against. Now, we had a time back in the day, years and years and years ago, where our old boss demanded that we were putting out heroes every 2 weeks. And during that time, we had the creation of a lot of very terrible heroes. And there was a lot of time after that we had a lot of other poorly designed heroes. Now, we try to fix those designs and make those better around for everyone strategically and fun-wise, but a lot of players just don't care if we change the playstyle. So do I think there is a better way? Sure. Are the players willing to accept that better way? Most of the time, not. Just because we've simply changed something that they're used to. So it is a balancing act. It's to try to appease an audience that doesn't want things to change but wants everything to change.
Yeah, but like there are certain there's certain like levels in how. Oh wait, did someone just talk? I didn't hear shit.
Yeah, but he was very quiet, so it's fine.
So the thing also comes from, we have one hero pool and we also have dramatically different audiences. So like whenever we make a change for 99% of our player base, which is Southeast Asia, we'll do a change for them. They love it, and you guys will hate it. And this generally becomes from they love casual mode and you guys love normal mode. So when we cater to that audience,
Casual.
you guys dislike it, and then when we cater to you guys, they dislike it. Now, it's very hard to, like, when we reworked Engineer, for example, there was a lot of people complaining about the mines, but Southeast Asia had overwhelmingly positive feedback on Engineer. So when we made this change, we made it for Southeast Asia, and Southeast Asia loves it. Whereas a lot of North American players feel like, oh, you took away mines, and mines were just cancer to play against anyways. But there's just this, this group of people that are just attached to the way things are, and regardless of if we'll make the game better designed or a better game in general for everyone, if we change it, they don't want it changed.
Yeah, but there are of course like different levels of change. I'm not necessarily talking about like completely reworking the way a hero works, but I'm more talking about.
That's exactly what you said. You said you want to change the playstyle, and if you change the playstyle, you're changing how it works.
Keep it non-toxic.
Like changing the playstyle can be in very small and subtle ways. For example, a change that I personally really love that was coming out recently was the Devour change. It made like the fact that his Q got this hook got a little bit longer and just like leveled up its skills a little bit. I thought it was really smart. I thought it was really fun to play. And those are also examples of changes where you change up the playstyle of the hero a tiny little bit to make it feel fresh and interesting. And that's more than like a flat.
So we have a different definition of playstyle. So when we determine what a playstyle is, a playstyle for a hero is split, and basically a role is a determining playstyle. So like if I have an agility melee carry, that's a playstyle. If I have a ranged ganker carry like a Ragnar Gunblade, that's a playstyle. Strength initiators like Magnus, Meraxis, Pestilence, that's a playstyle. Devo changing the range of his hook did switch up how he had to think about things.
Right, and is Ravener agility?
No. Ravener's strength. But that sort of stuff is what that's not really a play style change. But yeah, no, if you're talking about making small changes that make the hero feel fresh and new and make players have to approach how they play the hero differently, like changing Solstice's charge or changing Devourer's hook radius or range, then yeah, no, that's definitely good. But is that enough? Most of the time, not. No, it's not. In order to get a hero that is played at the 70th or below, if you get any hero that's in that 70th bracket or below that, it is very, 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 very hard to get players to try it, even if it's numerically broken. Even if you change the play style, even if you do a lot of things to it, it's very hard to push that out of that bracket of play. So if Devo was, for example, 120th played and I did that range change to him, would I see Devo all of a sudden climb up the ladder and all of a sudden he'd be starting to be played more? Most likely not. Most likely he would just still sit there. So perception is what drives a lot of the hero's playabilities. And in NAU explicitly, numerical changes or not big changes tend to not shift your perception to give a hero a try. There was a long time when we changed a Dr. Repulsor and everybody thought, oh, Dr. Repulsor was trash when we added the int onto the hero. And it took you guys probably a year and a half before you caught on that it wasn't bad. Whereas Southeast Asia had caught on to it in 3 months. And eventually, at a point, we said to ourselves, NAU's never going to really do anything with Dr. Repulsor, and we gave you guys what you wanted, which was to revert him back to his older form. And when we did that, it was then, well, what are you doing to the end form? So it's like almost like we can't win with certain situations.
I think one of the problems with why I think NAU doesn't really innovate is there's not really a reason to, because there's not any like tournaments at all, pretty much. There's not any competitive scene whatsoever. So like everyone just plays what they want to play, because it's not like you care about trying hard or anything. Like back when there was a competitive scene in NAEU, little changes would have made a difference. They would have changed the meta. People copy the meta, and then they try and do that kind of thing. That's how LoL works, at least as well. They just
Right, I would
copy what
agree,
pro scene's
100%.
doing.
I agree, but I disagree. There were situations where the meta would shift based on the competitive scene. The competitive scene would shift so slowly. How many years was it before we saw Riftwalker played once? Like the competitive scene does change the meta just because people watch competitive scene. They get influenced by that meta. But that meta transfers very slowly because unless someone's willing to experiment and then put that into practice, people don't need to adapt to the new stuff because nobody's going to try it. It's too dangerous. It's worth money if you fail.
Right. So I agree with both sentiments, and then the fact that if our player base was larger, like League of Legends, then yes, you can do a lot of small changes, and that shifts the meta. Now the meta shifts. A meta shift is always 100% of the time. We want it to be determined by the players, not something that we do. Like we don't want to just kill off jungling through changing the rules, and so then the meta shifts. We want players to do it. But Han, for a very long time, since it lost its competitive scene, well, a long time before it lost its competitive scene, it stopped innovating, and it stopped changing, and players stopped trying new things. And we were seeing innovation still, and we still do in Southeast Asia because they have the player base. We see them changing how they play all the time. They left the suicide meta, well over a year ago. And then they even went into a tri-lane meta for a small amount of time, and now they're back to a 2-1-2. And you guys are still, suicide meta. So there's nothing I can do about that, right? We have set ourselves up in this system where we get new players to come in, and then new players have to play against Smurfs or other toxic behaviors, and then they quit. Or the game itself just has 138 heroes that you have to learn, and it's just the burden of knowledge is so high. Now, every MOBA has that burden of knowledge problem. We're starting to see that the MOBA genre in general is on a decline because there isn't a large burden of knowledge in BR games like Fortnite. And so your average player can go into a Fortnite game, play that, and then learn and say, okay, well, I screwed that up. I'm going to play again. I'm screwed it up. I'm going to play again. And they learn a lot easier because it's very focused on just, killing what's in front of you. Whereas a new player comes and joins Han, and they're just inundated with so many effects and so many things on the screen and so many different items and all these different things that they have to learn that they're scared away. So then what we're left with is the player base that we have.
If someone new, just tell them play like Ravner, MOA.
I mean I would love it if our player base would help.
Can I ask a quick question? Whenever you're talking about the meta shifts in SEA, you've mentioned multiple times, and I definitely believe it, that they are big fans of casual mode. Is the dual lane meta that they exist in, or even that brief tri-lane meta that they had,
it's double
was
jungle,
that
dude.
primarily seen in casual mode play?
Say that again to me one more time.
Just I'm curious if the dual lane meta or tri-lane meta that you saw in SEA was primarily played in casual mode.
Oh, absolutely. So we have there is no normal mode in Southeast Asia.
Right, and so don't you think that could be at least partially responsible for why that meta is a little bit more popular? Because as it stands now, I mean, I can tell you one of the fundamental things that probably contributes to that is that in normal mode, a failed dual lane, which I've seen them a lot in pub games. Okay, you get two players that go into the long lane, but potentially they are uncoordinated because they never played together, they have disagreements, whatever. You know how toxic TMM can be. Same thing is just even multiplied further if you're talking about a tri lane. But these kinds of lanes failing in normal mode is superbly detrimental to your team's ability to come back into the game, which I feel like that is dampened in casual mode because there's no gold loss, right? You're still getting XP from the lane and everything, and you're able to take whatever gold that you got in the lane and rotate to another lane and potentially be effective elsewhere. But in normal mode, failing with a dual lane or a tri lane is just it's a recipe for disaster.
Right. Well, the general strategy in casual mode is that it's not about trying to get by with whatever resources you can scrape and trying to be as successful with whatever resources you can get. In casual mode, you're heavily rewarded for getting hero kills and not for farming. So
Definitely.
for them, setting up aggressive tri lanes and for them setting up incredibly powerful kill lanes in the off lane are driving them to victory. So it's still about winning their lane through aggression. Whereas in Han and NAU, it's very much about trying to be as defensive as you can. Put a suicide in the lane and make sure that we got a jungle hero and a short lane that's getting all the farm that they could possibly get. And so, yeah, I think in a lot of ways you are absolutely correct that casual mode does dampen a lot of those effects. But we have systemically for a long time just added in small little things, little rule checks here and there, little things that say, hey, you should probably try a different strategy, and we'll put it into the ether for you guys. We'll put it out in the patch notes. We'll spam it out to you guys, and you guys will just completely ignore it and go against it. Like right now, it is hands down one of the least efficient ways to play Han is through the suicide meta. And that's just statistically, like I'm not just saying that. That's like statistically just from the rule sets that we put in, correct. And
I mean,
I can explain kind of why that is as a suicide only player. Like the reason I played suicide is because I don't want to lane with people, because the problem is when you're playing TMM, especially nowadays where it's just so random who your teammates are. Like you can have really bad players on your team. It's just not worth laning with someone who can completely throw the game. Because if your dual lane loses and like the player you're playing with is not playing properly, you lose the game single-handedly because you have two heroes that do literally nothing because they both get completely shit on, and then you're feeding the carry. So it's like,
yeah,
I dual lane back in the day, even before it got buffed, but only if I was playing with someone I knew, because otherwise it's not worth it. It's just not worth the risk.
Well, there's nothing from my standpoint as a game designer. What am I supposed to do to solve that if you can't trust your player base?
What I mean is, I think it's just that causes toxicity because the most toxicity comes from the lanes with two people in it.
Right.
Because,
Well,
I mean,
so you're saying that the problem is that playing together. Well, I can't do anything about players' toxicity. If they're going to be assholes, they're going to be assholes.
No, that's what I'm talking about. I mean, like when you're trying to force a meta, we already know it's good. Like it's clearly good. Everyone knows that. It was good back then. It's still good now. But no one does it. And like even if you force it on us, we're not going to do it because no one wants to lane with each other. It's just the way it is.
Right. And so you know what? To be honest, I'm starting to learn that about NAEU that and that's kind of why these conversations are starting, and it's kind of why I'm trying to get involved in more of the community with you guys to make Han the game that you guys want. If NAEU wants a suicide meta, then even if it's clearly we know that if you get out of a suicide meta, I've had this conversation with you many times. You can have more viable heroes to be picked from. So that means that if there is if 2-1-2 just generally supports a more variety of heroes. And so the only reason why we want to move out of suicide meta is so that there's viable heroes for the public to pick from.
Because I think this game could definitely use more, like if you want more variety, you want to be adding more variety in the terms of adding more suicide and jungle viable heroes. Because right now there's not, like out of 134 heroes, there's a pretty small number of heroes that you can jungle with, and like at least efficiently jungle with. Like there's heroes that are just way better, and there's like probably 6 or 7 viable jungle heroes, and it's like out of 134, that's pretty small. There's a lot of room to add things that could be in jungle for bringing more heroes into the game, if you're going to keep making heroes. If you know what I mean.
Well, the thing is making new heroes that are suicide capable or jungle capable isn't going to solve the issue. It's more about changing the way the game is structured so that more of the heroes that are already existing are capable of either jungling or suiciding better than they are. So, if
I
for
brought
example,
up that with you. Yeah, I brought up that with
talking
you.
about it, and that's why I thought that it was worth looking into, because if the thought is the reason why we don't like the suicide meta is because a lot of offlane heroes can't be picked up. Like Meraxes has no place in the game. Why? He's not a good suicide. He's not a good short lane. He's not a good support. And he can't solo mid. He can't jungle. So he's not picked because he has no reason to exist in the game.
There's players that are. I've
You
seen
can play him against certain lanes. It
Right.
depends.
It's
Now,
rare players, man.
yeah, but what
Can't
you're
say that he
saying,
doesn't play well is, I think it's just patently false.
no. So that's what you're saying is called anecdotal. You're saying I found a guy who is really fucking good at the game and he crushes with Meraxes, so clearly you're wrong. Yeah,
I
no,
can
there
play
are
that hero
there
offlane.
are
I'm not a
outliers.
Meraxes main, but I can play that hero mid or
Right, and
offlane.
you're probably better than
Right.
99% of the people who play Han. Well, you have to understand that if you're in 1700 plus bracket, you are better than 95% of our player base. So yeah, you can probably offlane with Meraxes just fine, but most people cannot. And in fact, if I was in a, let's say, a bronze level game and I picked Meraxes and I said to you, I'm going to go suicide, it would often cause a lot of other people who don't know that you're capable of offlaning with Meraxes. They would start to freak out and yell at you and laugh and then start reporting you and say new Meraxes, and then you're just starting a big toxic environment, right? No, the fact of the matter is that Meraxes does not have a lane to go to, even though there might be players like yourself who can lane them anywhere. When you're talking about game design, you're not talking about the few. You want to also understand that at a core level, when somebody picks up a hero, where do they think this character belongs? Where do they think Meraxes belongs? Most players would not tell you the suicide. So these heroes aren't being picked up in the vast majority of cases because that player says, I don't know where to play him. And so when you have those situations, a lot of that is brought about because the game back in 2009 was designed around a 2-1-2 meta. It was designed around having a support in the short lane, a support in the off lane, and a carry in the short lane, and then a secondary carry, a 2 or 3, or an initiator in that off lane. And that was how it was supposed to be played. And the middle controls tempo by getting rune control and going and ganking. And that was just how Han was designed. Now, after 10 years, we've all decided that we know how to play the game differently. We've shifted how we play the game. And it's not so much about that anymore. But it still holds true that if we are in a 2-1-2 meta, more heroes are viable to be played because there's more places for them to go. But that's okay. If that's the case, if that's the reason why I don't like the suicide, if that's the reason why the design team says we don't like suicide, then we could go the other way and say instead, what if we did make Meraxes more appealing to the suicide to where the average player would think that Meraxes does belong there? Then Meraxes does have a place to go. And then we could net the same result and keep the suicide meta. But the problem then turns into, if we do that for NAAU, do we completely bastardize Southeast Asia, right, and how they're playing?
Yeah, I get your dilemma between the two different the game modes for sure. And I'm absolutely not opposed to you trying to shift back into a 2-1-2 meta because, like you said, that is actually the original state of the game. I mean, I've been playing so long. I remember when Dota, the dual mid, was actually the go-to in Dota 1.
Right.
And it was actually like that in early stages of Han. But there are certain things that are standing in the way of that. And you say that, suicide isn't a very good meta, but there are, I think it probably stems more from as you acknowledge, the bad player base, but there are a lot of players that just don't understand how to short lane and actually give a lot to opposing suicide players.
Yep.
Most of the time, when you're in a game as a suicide player, all you have to do is wait for the enemy short laner to lose lane control by like the third or fourth wave. And then you can basically just transition into like a second mid as the suicide. It's actually very jokes. And I know it's bridging or it's creeping towards like anecdotal, but um, I've seen games where like Thunderbringers will go off lane, a hero that has no business in the off lane at all, getting things out of it simply because the player base doesn't know how to short lane. And so it's to say that you can't like these are issues that are going to perpetuate the existence of the suicide meta more than anything else, in my opinion.
Well,
Yeah, 'cause-
I do
'cause-
think that it perpetuates the suicide meta. I don't know if it's more than anything else, but I think I think that's very smart, logical reasoning there. I would agree with that. That there is the vast majority of the people who play in the short lane do not know how to control creep equilibrium, and they lose control of the lane, and then you can just suicide with whatever you want. That's very smart. The thing is trying to solve those issues. So one of the reasons why short lane carries lose lane control is because of the ranged creep aggro that we had, and I changed it to where the range creep wouldn't aggro in the way that it was, and it would lose its aggro and drop back and go back to the melee units. And this allowed for better creep equilibrium and lane control for the carry player. This was massively yelled at by the NAU public because they said that this hurt suicide. Well, that was the point of it. It was supposed to hurt suicide, but it just had such an outlash from the community that we went back. We said, okay, well, now we're going to meet in the middle. And so we're learning that even when we see the things that even you bring up, and we're trying to fix them or solve them because of what we feel is right, and what is right is trying to keep the game going as long as possible, and that means more heroes being played. The NAU player base shoots us down. They say, no, this isn't what we want. We want how it is, and that's it. And so the more that we're trying to change things, I think the more we're hurting the NAU specifically. Now, Southeast Asia, when we make changes, they love them most of the time. It's you guys that really are just stuck in your ways and love to play a certain way. And I think that love to play in a certain way and that inability to try to accept new changes or a different way of playing is what's going to kill off the NAU player base sooner than it would have to be killed off. I think that right now the biggest detriment to the NAU player base is not actually design, but the players themselves not wanting to try different ways of playing.
Wait, why don't you guys like suicide so much?
I've ranted about it.
Yeah, we've been talking about that for like the past 15 minutes.
I like zoned out for a bit.
Oh, hero diversity, basically.
The short version of it is the game was designed around meta, and there's a whole list of heroes that offlane heroes that were designed around being in the offlane, but not as a suicide hero. And all those heroes don't statistically have a place in the game as long as there's a suicide meta in play. So, the same would be the case if there was a tri-lane meta in play, because tri-lane metas don't often support anything but a suicide either. So those sort of lane combinations are the reasons why we're seeing a lot of these heroes that don't